British hybrid war. Hybrid warfare is a form of hostile action in which the aggressor avoids direct military intervention and operates through proxy forces. Its arsenal is diverse: political pressure, economic coercion, information warfare, armed attacks by neighboring states, subversive activities by intelligence agencies, and the financing of opposition, separatist, and terrorist groups. Hybrid warfare is the British ruling class's favorite tool. It resembles an octopus attack. The center remains in the shadows, while the victim perceives each tentacle as an independent force. This is exactly the picture that the media supports. Since the European revolutions of 1848, the British ruling class has waged hybrid wars against its main geopolitical adversaries, Germany, Russia, and the United States. Since the collapse of the British Empire, Israel has been added to this list. This video is devoted to the hybrid war against the State of Israel. It is here that the tactics, methods, and character of the forces known as the British ruling class are particularly evident. Looking at this example is also important because most modern nations, to varying degrees, find themselves the targets of aggression from this force, often without realizing it. The first manifestation of the hybrid war against the future state of Israel was the Arab-Jewish conflict initiated by the British ruling class in 1921. The conflict was a consequence of the Balfour Declaration, which in practice, a diplomatic ploy that allowed London to retain Palestine under its control for as long as possible. The declaration consisted of two parts. The first part contained Britain's commitment to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was this commitment that allowed London to obtain a mandate from the League of Nations to govern Palestine and reject Arab claims to the territory. The second part contained a clause that allowed the first to be annulled. It stated, "No action shall be taken which might infringe the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine." Britain came to the Middle East not to create a Jewish state, but to establish control over the oil fields of Mesopotamia in the Mosul region. When the Kirkuk-Haifa pipeline was commissioned in 1934 and Mosul oil began flowing to the shores of the Mediterranean, Palestine and the port of Haifa became crucial to Britain. Royal Navy ships and tankers carrying oil to the British Isles refueled there. For London, it was the closest and most important source of black gold. Palestine also served as a buffer zone covering the Suez Canal, a key transport artery of the British Empire through which oil produced by the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was delivered to the metropolis. Given Palestine's economic and strategic importance, the British ruling class had no intention of handing the territory over to the Jews from the outset. This is clearly indicated by Lord Milner's statement in the House of Lords in June 1923. Concluding his speech, he declared, "Palestine must never become a Jewish state." In order to invoke the second part of the Balfour Declaration and abandon their obligations, the British authorities in Palestine decided to ignite an Arab-Jewish conflict. To this end, they released the Arab nationalist leader Amin al-Husseini from prison and appointed him Mufti of Jerusalem. Husseini lived up to the expectations of his British patrons. In May 1921, he organized anti-Jewish riots in Jaffa. In August 1929, his activities resulted in a wave of mass murders of Jews in Hebron, Safed, and Haifa. By 1936, Husseini's influence had reached such a level that he was able to organize an Arab armed revolt that now threatened the British Empire itself. The suppression of the revolt took more than 2.5 years. After Husseini had fulfilled his role, the British administration removed him from his post as chairman of the Supreme Muslim Council and arrested the council's members. The Arab revolt resulted in Colonial Secretary MacDonald's White Paper, published in May 1939, 3 months before the outbreak of World War II. Under its terms, Britain renounced the obligations of the Balfour Declaration and declared the new goal of His Majesty's government to be the creation of an independent Palestinian state with an Arab majority. The history of the Balfour Declaration leads to two conclusions. First, an agreement with the British ruling class is worthless if the other side has no leverage to force it to comply with its obligations. Second, the British ruling class is trying to undermine the position of its agreement partner in order to avoid fulfilling its obligations. During World War II, in an effort to prevent the Jewish population of Palestine from growing due to refugees from Europe, Britain resorted to the help of the Nazis. In the spring of 1944, London's policy of closing Palestine to Jews was threatened. The Nazi leadership offered to exchange 800,000 Hungarian Jews for goods needed by Germany. In response, the British ruling class decided to thwart this initiative by ensuring the accelerated deportation of Hungarian Jews to concentration camps. Using the Jewish Agency's London headquarters and its Budapest branch, British intelligence services entered into an agreement with the leadership of the Third Reich. The agreement's purpose was to facilitate the deportation of Jews to Nazi concentration camps. As a result, almost all Hungarian Jews were sent to death camps over the course of 3 summer months in 1944. This crime is described in detail in Ben Hecht's book, Perfidy, published in the United States in 1961. Despite the fact that Jews were Britain's allies in World War II, as Jewish Agency President Chaim Weizmann publicly declared 3 days before the war, the British ruling class did not hesitate to send 800,000 Jews to their deaths, considering them a threat to its interests. This leads to the conclusion: the British ruling class honors its alliance commitments only as long as they align with its interests. This position was formulated back in the 19th century by Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston. Quote, "We have no eternal allies, and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests it is our duty to follow." End of quote. After World War II, Britain attempted to destroy the Jewish state with the armies of neighboring Arab countries. To this end, London initiated the creation of the Arab League in March 1945, uniting Syria, Transjordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Egypt. Saudi Arabia and North Yemen later joined the organization. In 1947, on the eve of the UN vote on the partition of Palestine, British intelligence in the Middle East, under the leadership of General Iltid Clayton, together with the governments of the Arab League countries, coordinated preparations for an attack on the future Jewish state. In September 1947, the French attaché in Baghdad informed his superiors of a secret British plan to spark an Arab-Jewish war in Palestine. After the expected victory over the Jewish state, Britain planned to divide the captured territory between the attackers. London intended to retain Haifa with its port and oil refineries, as well as the Negev region, which opened the route to Sinai and Egypt. The British plan was put into action on May 15, 1948, when the armies of 5 states, members of the Arab League, invaded Israel. In January 1949, when it became clear that Arab armies would be unable to destroy Israel, Britain decided to attack the Jewish state directly. Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin issued an ultimatum. Unless Israeli troops immediately withdrew from Egyptian territory, Britain would enter the war. The threat of an Anglo-Israeli conflict was removed thanks to the intervention of President Truman and pressure from the British public, which did not want to participate in another war. While the British ruling class needed Jews to secure a mandate to govern Palestine and deflect Arab claims, it promoted the creation of a Jewish national homeland in Palestine. Having achieved its goal, London began to backtrack on its commitments, then repudiated them, and finally tried to exterminate the Jews. After World War II, the British ruling class took steps to reassert its influence over the global left. To this end, in 1951, the Fabian Society re-established the Socialist International, headquartered in London. This organization, uniting 132 parties from over 100 countries, is a powerful instrument for advancing British interests on the global stage. In 2017, Socialist International President Antonio Guterres was elected UN Secretary General. In this position, he strengthened his promotion of the priorities of British globalism. The climax of Guterres' tenure as Secretary General was the COVID-19 pandemic, which he, together with Prince Charles, described as the Great Reset of the global economy. The British ruling class is actively using the Socialist International in its hybrid war against the State of Israel. A striking example is the campaign initiated by London in April 2025 to recognize the non-existent State of Palestine. Its goal is to prevent the Israeli leadership from destroying the terrorist organization Hamas, which, as the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, acts as a proxy for Britain. The initiative of British Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, to recognize the State of Palestine has been supported by heads of state-leading parties that are members of the Socialist International or are within the British sphere of influence. Among them are Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party and former Governor of the Bank of England; Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, leader of the Labour Party; Malta Prime Minister Robert Abella, leader of the Labour Party; Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Støre, leader of the Labour Party; Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, leader of the Socialist Workers' Party; Portuguese Prime Minister Luís Montenegro, leader of the Social Democratic Party; and French President Emmanuel Macron. In the list above, members of the Socialist International include the Labour parties of Great Britain, Australia, Norway, Malta, and the Socialist Party of Spain. Other parties and political leaders are, to varying degrees, within London's orbit of influence. The Liberal Party of Canada is a member of Liberal International, headquartered in London. French President Emmanuel Macron is a former employee of Rothschild & Cie, a bank owned by the Rothschild family, which has remained a symbol of British influence for centuries. Portugal, since the overthrow of the monarchy in 1910, has been within the British sphere of influence, regardless of the political orientation of the party in power. Conclusions. If a group of countries is taking concerted hostile steps against your country, it makes sense to take a closer look at the political affiliations of their leaders. If these countries are led by leaders of left-wing parties, then, in all likelihood, the actions against your country are being coordinated from London, from the headquarters of the Socialist International or the Fabian Society. Another form of British hybrid warfare is the use of left-wing parties as fifth columns. After establishing control over the global left movement, left-wing parties in various countries essentially turned into London's fifth columns. In Israel, these fifth columns are represented by two leftist parties, the Labour Party, Avoda, and the Social Democratic Party, Meretz. Both consistently adhere to London's policy aimed at weakening and eliminating the State of Israel. After 3 defeats of the Arab armies that attacked Israel, the British ruling class came to the conclusion that it was impossible to destroy the Jewish state by military means. Subsequently, a different tactic was chosen: strangling Israel under the guise of the so-called peace process. A key role in the implementation of this tactic was assigned to the Israeli left and its leader Shimon Peres, who was elected vice president of the Socialist International in 1978. In September 1993, the Israeli left-wing government and Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, a document that marked a tragic turning point in the history of the Jewish state. The Norwegian Labour Party, one of the most anti-Israel forces within the Socialist International, played a significant role in their preparation. As part of the agreements, the left brought Yasser Arafat and his 50,000-strong army of terrorists from Tunisia to Israel and created for him the Palestinian Authority as a prototype of a future Palestinian state. Once inside Israel, Arafat turned to what he knew best: terrorism. During the terrorist war known as the Oslo War, in the first 5 years after the signing of the Accords, the number of Israelis killed by Arafat's terrorists exceeded the total for the previous 15 years. Overall, in the 15 years since the signing of the Oslo Accords, approximately 1,500 Israelis have been killed, equivalent to 33,000 deaths in Russia or 67,000 in the United States. Not content with unleashing a terrorist war, Israel's left-wing government initiated a unilateral withdrawal of IDF troops from southern Lebanon in 2000. This move led to the formation of a Hezbollah terrorist enclave on the northern border. Its consequences included rocket attacks on northern Israel and 2 full-scale wars. Having eliminated security on the northern border, the left turned its attention to the south. In 2005, the Israeli left-wing government withdrew troops and evacuated Jewish settlements from the Gaza Strip. As a result, the terrorist quasi-state of Hamas emerged there, which began systematically shelling southern Israel. The result of this policy was the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, in which 1,200 Israeli citizens were killed. The result of the Israeli left's peacekeeping activities has been a semi-ring of terror encircling the Jewish state on 3 sides: Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and Fatah, Hamas underground cells, and Islamic Jihad in the east. The country's security situation has regressed to a level reminiscent of 1949. Conclusion. Citizens of various countries should understand a simple truth. By voting for a left-wing party, they are effectively opening the door to foreign influence. Once in power, the left inevitably turns the country into an instrument of British foreign policy, damaging national interests. Domestically, they typically follow the agenda of the British Fabian Society, which includes welcoming Muslim migrants, multiculturalism, gender diversity, and the curtailment of civil rights and economic freedoms. Moreover, supporting left-wing parties means agreeing with their course toward the creation of a world government, as was officially declared at the 1962 conference of the Socialist International in Oslo. Quote, "The ultimate objective of the parties of the Socialist International is nothing less than world government. As a first step towards it, they seek to strengthen the United Nations. Membership of the United Nations must be made universal." End of quote. The British oligarchy actively uses the United Nations as an instrument of international pressure. According to research by Carol Quigley, Rose Martin, and Ion Ratiu, three forces played a key role in the creation of the UN. First, the Milner Group, the leading faction of the British ruling class, and its think tank, the Fabian Society. They formed an alliance with the American oligarchy, which Professor Quigley called the Anglo-American establishment. Second, two sister organizations created by the Anglo-American establishment to implement its projects, the British Royal Institute of International Affairs and the American Council on Foreign Relations. And third, the International Alliance of Left-Wing Parties and Movements. Socialists, as the political force of international capital, have governed the UN since its founding. Given the origins and purpose of the UN, it is not surprising that the State of Israel has become the main target of its attacks. A clear example is a type of hybrid warfare using Palestinians, the media, and the UN. Its structure is as follows. Palestinians commit a terrorist attack against Israel. Israel conducts a counter-terrorism operation. Palestinian propaganda, dubbed Pallywood, fabricates stories about Palestinian suffering. These stories are published unverified by Qatar's Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera's publications are then disseminated by British media. Media controlled by the American oligarchy join in. Responding to the propaganda campaign of the Anglo-American establishment, the UN convenes a General Assembly meeting where an anti-Israel resolution is proposed. The following groups of countries typically vote in favor of anti-Israel resolutions: states governed by a left-wing party or a London-aligned president, members of the British Commonwealth of Nations, members of the Arab League, created at the initiative of Britain, Muslim countries, and states of the former Soviet Union, where the legacy of communism, influenced by the British Fabian Society, is still palpable. As a result, the UN's activities focused on condemning the Jewish state. In 2023, Israel was subject to UN sanctions decisions twice as often as the rest of the world combined. Israel was the target of 14 resolutions, while all other states, including the authoritarian regimes of North Korea, Russia, Syria, and Iran, were condemned only 7 times. In 2022, 15 of the 27 UN resolutions condemned Israel. Between 2015 and 2022, the General Assembly adopted 140 resolutions on Israel and 68 on all other countries combined. UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan was forced to admit that his organization's actions created the impression of bias. Quote, "The exclusion of Israel from the system of regional groupings, the intense focus given to some of Israel's actions, while other situations in the world sometimes fail to elicit the similar outrage. These and other circumstances have given a regrettable impression of bias and one-sidedness." End of quote. Conclusion. The United Nations, conceived and functioning as a world government, contradicts the interests of peoples and threatens the sovereignty of their states. Given the dominance of anti-national forces within the United Nations, reforming it seems impossible. Therefore, the optimal solution appears to be the dismantling of this organization. Let us briefly consider other directions of the British hybrid war. Embargo. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Israel was attacked by 3 Arab states, Britain declared neutrality and imposed an arms embargo on all parties to the conflict. In reality, this decision only affected Israel. British equipment used by the Israeli army required ammunition and components, while Egypt and Syria were actively supplied by the Soviet Union. Britain maintained the embargo against Israel for 20 years. In 2024, during Israel's war with Hamas, the British government reimposed an embargo on arms exports to Israel. Fortunately, having learned from bitter experience, Israel had by then significantly reduced its imports of British defense products. Espionage. According to documents from Edward Snowden's leaked archives, British intelligence agencies conducted surveillance on Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israeli diplomats for many years. Israeli defense companies, government agencies responsible for international cooperation, and university research centers were also targets of espionage. NGO funding. According to a June 2024 report by the Institute NGO Monitor, the UK government funds numerous non-governmental organizations involved in anti-Israel activities, including calls for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions, as well as legal campaigns against Israel. Some of these NGOs, according to the report, are linked to terrorist organizations. This funding continued even after the Hamas-organized massacre of Jews on October 7th. Financing terrorism. The UK, which has officially designated Hamas a terrorist organization, is one of its 3 largest financial donors. This includes both private donations and public funds channeled through UN agencies. According to a document from the British Consulate in Jerusalem in 2024, London transferred $23 million to Hamas under the guise of humanitarian support. Use of the International Court. A group of British lawyers was behind the International Criminal Court's initiative to issue an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The International Court prosecutor Karim Ahmad Khan, a Muslim who issued the arrest warrant, is also a British citizen. He previously served as the UK's Crown Prosecutor. The Trump administration imposed sanctions on those involved in this decision, including the British lawyers and the International Court prosecutor. Credit rating downgrade. In February 2024, during the Gaza war, the British division of the agency Moody's Ratings downgraded Israel's credit rating. 6 months later, immediately after the assassination of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, the rating was downgraded again to the lowest level in the country's history. This move was made despite Israel's impeccable credit history, the resilience of its economy, and one of the highest growth rates among developed countries. After Donald Trump returned to the White House, Britain's use of the credit agency for political purposes ceased. In March 2025, the central office of the rating agency Moody's decided to transfer the preparation of reports on Israel from its British unit to its American one. Financing color revolutions. In July 2025, the U.S. Congressional Judiciary Committee published a memorandum containing the findings of investigation into the Biden administration's illegal activities against the State of Israel. Throughout its term, the Biden administration financed protests against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. According to the Congressional Judiciary Committee, approximately $1 billion was allocated from government sources, with funds reaching approximately 1,000 Israeli left-wing organizations. Funding was channeled through the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development. Conclusion. Hybrid warfare is not simply a tactic for striking from the shadows and evading responsibility. It is a way of life for the British ruling class. This is how the Venetian oligarchy operated, maintaining its influence despite the modest size and limited resources of the Venetian Republic. In the 17th century, this experience was adopted by the British ruling class, whose development took place under the influence of Venice. In the 20th century, in an effort to maintain global dominance, the British ruling class organized 2 revolutions in Russia, unleashed 2 world wars, initiated the Cold War, and provoked numerous conflicts, coups d'état, color revolutions, and assassinations of political leaders. In the 21st century, the British ruling class and its intelligence services are behind the subversive activities of radical Islam, the Antifa movement, anarchists, and radical racial organizations like BLM. British historian Mark Curtis gave a laconic but capacious characterization of the global role of the British ruling class. Quote, "The basic fact is that Britain is a major systematic contributor to much of the world's suffering and horrors." End of quote. The awareness of this fact by the peoples of different countries can become the first step towards freeing the world from the influence of the predatory entity that is the British ruling class. The next step should be action at the national level, boycotting parties and banning organizations that serve supranational interests, supporting nationally oriented forces seeking to restore sovereignty, dissolving the UN and eliminating organizations created under its auspices. A link to the text with sources is provided below this video. Thank you for your attention.